Three completely different eras, industries, and causes of decline. But look closely and a pattern emerges. Lennon's fame made him too accessible. Elvis's fame made him too isolated. Ali's fame demanded a physical toll he kept paying, long after the cheering should have stopped. Three men. Three of the most famous faces of the 20th century. A songwriter who changed music forever. A king who redefined stardom itself. A fighter who became the most recognized human being on the planet. All three reached a level of fame most people can't even imagine. And all three found out in very different ways that fame doesn't just lift you up. Sometimes it comes for you. This is the story of what fame actually cost John Lennon, Elvis Presley, and Muhammad Ali. John Lennon, the target. By 1980, John Lennon hadn't toured in years. He was living quietly in New York City, raising his son Sean, stepping back from the spotlight he'd occupied since Beatlemania first exploded in the early 1960s. But stepping back from touring didn't mean stepping back from fame. Lennon was still one of the most recognizable men alive, and that recognition meant he was reachable. He signed autographs outside his own apartment building. He walked the streets of Manhattan without heavy security, because for years that had simply been how he lived. On the evening of December 8, 1980, a man named Mark David Chapman approached Lennon outside the Dakota Building. Lennon had signed an autograph for Chapman just hours earlier that same day. When Lennon returned that night, Chapman shot him. Lennon died within the hour. He was 40 years old. What makes the story so unsettling isn't just the violence, it's the access. Fame at Lennon's level meant his daily routine, his home address. Even his evening plans were essentially public knowledge to anyone determined enough to find them. The same openness that made him beloved a Beatle, who still signed autographs, who still lived like a New Yorker, was exploited by someone obsessed with him. Lennon's death changed how the entire industry thought about celebrity security. But for him, the lesson came too late. Elvis Presley, the slow burn. Elvis Presley's danger looked nothing like Lennon's. There was no stranger, no single moment. Elvis's fame consumed him from the inside, slowly, over 2 decades. By the 1970s, Presley was arguably the most famous entertainer on earth, but he was also isolated. Gone were the days of walking through Memphis unnoticed. His world had shrunk to Graceland, to hotel suites, to a tightly controlled inner circle known as the Memphis Mafia. Constant touring, constant performing, and the crushing pressure of being Elvis 24 hours a day took a physical and psychological toll. He turned to prescription medication first to manage the exhaustion of his schedule, then to sleep, then simply to function. Doctors around him wrote prescriptions rather than saying no to the king of rock and roll. Few people in his orbit had the standing or the willingness to tell him to stop. On August 16, 1977, Elvis was found unresponsive in his Graceland bathroom. He was 42. The official cause was cardiac arrhythmia, with multiple drugs found in his system. Elvis didn't have an assassin. He had an entire ecosystem built around giving him whatever he wanted, whenever he wanted it, because saying no to Elvis Presley was, in its own way, unthinkable. Fame didn't kill him with a bullet. It surrounded him with enablers instead of guardrails. Muhammad Ali, the price of greatness. Muhammad Ali's danger came from the very thing that made him a legend, the ring. Ali fought professionally for over 2 decades, absorbing punishment from some of the hardest hitters in heavyweight history: Joe Frazier, George Foreman, Ken Norton, Larry Holmes. He was known for his ability to take a punch as much as for his speed and showmanship. That durability made him a legend. It also meant thousands of blows to the head over a career that, many now believe, went on longer than his body could safely sustain. In 1984, just 3 years after his final fight, Ali was diagnosed with Parkinson's syndrome, a condition linked by researchers to repeated head trauma. The man who once moved like nobody his size had ever moved who talked faster and louder than anyone in sports history, spent his final decades with a slowed voice and a tremor he couldn't hide from the cameras that once loved to find him. Ali lived until 2016, and he spent much of that time as a global humanitarian, beloved even more in decline than he'd been at his peak. But the diagnosis was, by many accounts, a direct legacy of the very career that made him the greatest. Fame didn't strike Ali suddenly. It was billed to him one fight at a time, and the invoice came due decades later. In each case, it wasn't talent that put them at risk. It was exactly the thing that made them legends in the first place. The visibility, the devotion, the relentless demand to keep performing, keep being who the world needed them to be. That's the part of celebrity biography that rarely makes the highlight reel. The machinery of fame doesn't stop to ask whether the person inside it is okay. If you want more stories about the people behind the legends, the real cost of stardom, and the family and friends who watched it happen up close, subscribe to Celebrity Fact File, and I'll see you in the next one.